Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today we have another exciting guest on our show. His name is Mike, and he's going to talk about his campaign. So welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. It's great to be with you.
Mike, let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
You bet. I am a Libertarian. I've run for Congress in the past as a Libertarian, and I am now seeking the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. I am a retired police officer. I worked for 11 years as a cop on the road in Broward County, Florida, until a few months ago as a second career. Before that, I was a professional economist for over 20 years, working for the federal government and international agencies, working for a trade association. I had my own business, educating bankers for quite a few years. I've taught economics at the university level at 3 different universities, and I've worked as a public school substitute teacher. So I've been around the block a little bit.
Yes, it sounds like it. You went from an economics position to a police officer position, right?
Exactly.
That's interesting. So what led you to the Libertarian Party?
Pardon me?
What led you to the Libertarian Party?
What brought me there?
Yes.
I had been a little bit involved with the Republican Party for quite a few years and just became disillusioned with the party's commitment to some of the things that I consider my core values. In the Republican Party, we used to spend quite a bit of time talking about fiscal responsibility, monetary policy, and those things have gone a little bit by the wayside. I would argue that around the turn of the century, they were going a little bit by the wayside, and lately they have been completely left behind. So that was a big disappointment for me. I worked for the White House for a couple of years when George Herbert Walker Bush had made his pledge, read my lips, no do taxes, and he went back on that, and that was a disappointment and an eye-opener for a young economist. So that was sort of the beginning of the end for me with the Republican Party. I'm a big believer in individual rights and limited government, indeed delimited government. I believe that our federal government's powers are enumerated in the Constitution, and that's where it begins and ends. So I'm a big believer in federalism and our individual rights that need to be protected by the government, and that's pretty much all that we need a government for when you come right down to it.
So what position did you work in the White House?
I was an economist. I worked for the Office of Management and Budget. That was several hundred years ago. To say that I was at a low rung on the ladder would be an understatement, right? My job was to help other budget analysts understand the law, how it worked, develop estimates of how much individual pieces of legislation would cost to implement, and keep track of those proposals and the budget at large.
So how did your position in the police department, how did that inform your political views?
Working as a cop will turn you into an economist, Andrew. Whether you're an economist or not when you start out, you end up an economist when you finish a career as a police officer, because you see firsthand how government policy affects communities that you care about. One of the communities that I worked in, I was a cop in South Broward County in South Florida. I worked in a couple of different communities that were deeply affected by the way that our federal government and the way that the state of Florida implemented policy toward the war on poverty, or what we used to call the war on poverty. Things that included how we implement welfare, how we supplement income, housing policies, things like this that are implemented by people of goodwill, trying to do the right thing, trying to help people. But as we have learned since the 1960s, so often these policies are the type that undermine a culture, that undermine family, that undermine the values that any particular community would start out having, and just erodes an economy from the inside out. It's really a horrible thing to see. And when you layer on top of that how oppressive our criminal justice system can be, starting with the war on drugs, not only do we have a tough war on drugs, but we have a tough attitude towards sentencing in this country, which is why we have far and away more people locked up in prisons and jails than any other country in the world on a per capita basis, by far. When you layer that on top of the bad policy we have toward poverty, it really, you really see the problems that a government can cause in the health and well-being of a community, both from a cultural standpoint as well as an economic, financial wealth building standpoint.
Sure. So how do you plan to stand out from the other nominees in the Libertarian Party? How do you plan to get the nomination?
I plan on running a campaign that is both very, very professional and very, very bold. We have learned in the Libertarian Party that we can go one direction or the other and not have a great deal of success. But I believe that my campaign will be unique inside the party over the course of this 2 years, in the sense that I can bring both to bear. Not only am I a policy professional with 30 years of experience involved in public policy and public service, both as a cop and as an economist, but in addition to that, we are going to be out there pushing the boldest proposals that the Libertarian Party believes in. We are not going to back down from the toughest issues, and we're not going to back down from a full-throated defense of how we feel about individual rights and limited government. So we are running a campaign that's very much anti-war, and indeed, we believe that we need to exit NATO completely before NATO expands its power, expands to include the Asia-Pacific Rim area, brings in new partners, and gets us into another war that the United States does not need to be in. We also are running a campaign that is bold in terms of recognizing that we need to deeply and fundamentally reform the way that we manage police. We need to end the war on drugs and reform our criminal justice system. We're also campaigning on bold reform to our fiscal policy and monetary policy. Not only do we believe that fiscal and monetary policy have gotten away from our government in the last generation in terms of building debt, not being responsible in terms of accruing huge deficits, and in terms of issuing money at far too rapid a pace. In addition to all that, we believe that the system that we have now with the Federal Reserve in control of our money supply is fundamentally flawed, and it's time to sunset the Fed itself. We believe that if we end the Federal Reserve system's charter, that we can be better off with a monetary policy that is controlled by rules instead of individuals who are affected by politics, individuals who may be trying to do the best job they can, but because they're only guessing, they introduce an element of uncertainty and error that makes it very difficult for us to interpret changes in prices and to have a steady monetary policy. So we believe that we need to end the Fed completely.
Wow. So since you've run for office before, what lessons did you learn in the past, and how are you going to apply that this time around?
One thing that I learned running for Congress in the past as a Libertarian is that the Libertarian Party brand is really much, much smaller than what I had realized going into the race. Most people have never heard of the party or any other third party. Those who had heard of it were largely unable to name any characteristic of the party or what our policies are, what our beliefs are, what we complain about, and what we root for. So it's a two-step process. Not only do you have to build awareness of your own campaign, you have to build awareness of the party you represent. So it's a real heavy lift.
So earlier you were talking about we. Are you referring to a team you have?
I do have a team in place. I've got a team of about 14 advisors, people that work on the campaign part-time, and myself, of course. And I believe that that's the way it necessarily needs to be to run a professional campaign. Sure. Not only is there a lot of work to do, right? We all know that, in terms of getting out the word, in terms of raising money. But just as importantly, having a team of people inside the party who can offer some advice and guidance in terms of policy positions and messaging to help you stay on track and to be as successful as possible.
So how did you recruit these members from the party?
Well, they are people that I have known over the years. Many of them come from Broward County, like I was in Broward County the past 20 years. I've since relocated to the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I met a lot of people who were involved in the congressional campaign that I had run last year and wanted to be involved with the presidential run. Individuals who are committed to the cause, committed to the Libertarian Party, and agree with me on basic principles, including the idea that we need to run a professional campaign and one that at the same time goes after the most bold proposals and messaging.
Sure. So since you're running for the presidential office, everyone is familiar with the president in a general sense. But from your political perspective, what are the limitations and the powers of the presidency that you see are legitimate and that you would use and leverage?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we as libertarians feel very differently about this than the other parties. The other parties have, over the years, one might argue over the last 200 years, but certainly in the last generation, have accumulated and have sought and garnered for themselves increasing power, greater power than ever before. The White House has been a place where, irrespective of party, the president has taken advantage of the idea of fairly sweeping presidential orders without seeking legislation to back up the policies that he wants to pursue. We believe that that is fundamentally flawed, that is absolutely wrong. The first thing I would do in power is to eliminate the effects of past presidential decrees, just because I believe that process is completely unconstitutional. The other thing that I would do is I would veto any legislation that did not put us on a path to reducing our enormous national debt. The presidency has been a way to expand that debt, not only failing to put a check on the legislature, but accelerating the pace at which each subsequent legislature spends money. Instead of slowing down Congress, the White House, irrespective of what party's in power, has put forward proposals to spend more and more money every year with absolutely no end in sight. We need to get we need to get that under control. In fact, Andrew, I really believe that both parties at the presidential level and indeed throughout Congress, both parties have taken it upon themselves, rather than to stick to the Constitution, adopt as their primary objective keeping the other party out of power. And so they're willing to spend whatever it takes to win over voters and keep the other side out of power. They're willing to undermine fundamental democratic institutions to keep the other side out of power. And all this has to stop. It's one of the reasons why I believe that past elections may not have been all that important, because the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, those differences have becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. But the next election, I believe, could be important in the sense that it's a huge opportunity for the Libertarian Party to make a very different case to the American people, that we need to stop drifting away from the Constitution. We need to stop this idea of just squabbling between the two major parties, trying to make the other side look bad, and get back to fundamentals of public policy and sticking to the Constitution, protecting our individual rights.
Sure. So when is the nomination occurring? Since the election is in 2024, I imagine sometime closer then. When is it exactly occurring?
It'll be in May of 2024. The party has a convention, just like the Republican and Democratic parties have their convention to name their nominee a couple of months later in the summer, typically. They will do so in 2024. We will do so in May, but we do not have a primary process that chooses our delegates with an open vote. Our delegates are chosen at our respective state conventions, which will take place earlier that same year, in a few cases in the fall of 2023. Those delegates are not bound to any particular candidate. So something like 900 delegates from around the United States will come to that May 2024 convention, and they will select a nominee.
Okay. Do you think the other candidates are already campaigning like you are, or are you ahead of the game?
I am ahead of the game. I am very early in the process. It was the feeling of myself and my team that it made sense for our particular strategy to begin early, and that's for two different reasons. Number one, we have a big deficit in terms of name recognition. The other likely candidates to seek the nomination have a great deal more name recognition within the Libertarian Party. The other reason is that the story that we're telling is slightly more complex than what the other candidates will be telling.
Okay.
We are a much more professional campaign. We're going to need time to make the case that my background as a professional in public policy and public service is the right way to go. I think it'll take time for us to convince everyone that a well-articulated series of public policy positions is necessary, and so it'll take a while for us to get folks on board. So we decided to start early.
Sounds good. So how can our audience out there support your campaign?
The best thing that they can do is go to our website. They can check out all of our other social media, of course, but the links to the other social media are on our website. It is MikeTermaat.com. Of course, you'd have to spell it right, MikeTermaat.com. If somebody had a few bucks burning a hole in their pocket and they just have to get rid of it, that is a great way to do it on our website. And I encourage everyone to consider making a donation, because I take care of all administrative expenses myself. So every dollar of donation will go toward getting the word out So that's very important to understand.
Sure. Sounds good, Mike. Mike, thank you
Thanks,
for coming
Andrew.
thank you for coming on the podcast today. We appreciate you sharing your views about what's going on.
Well, it's my pleasure, Andrew. I'm a big fan of what you are doing. I think that alternative parties have a big future in the United States, especially the Libertarian Party, which is obviously by far the biggest party outside of the Republican and Democratic Party. But I do believe that the increasing authoritarianism that has been brought to bear by the two major parties is a result of having only two parties, is a result of those parties paying more attention to each other than to our Constitution. So I'm a big fan of alternative parties and therefore a big fan of what you all are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.
I wish you all the best in your campaign and all your other personal and professional endeavors.
Thanks a lot. You take care.
All right. All the best. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye.